Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
You are certainly. And today we're going to talk about naturally healthy pets or how to keep Fido alive without taking out a second mortgage. So I'm always amazed how much people will spend on their pets. I mean, dogs and cats, you know. I mean, $6,000, $7,000,
Okay, you wouldn't even have a dog or a cat,
No.
so you're not a good judge of this.
I'd say, hey, this one was free. I'm sure there's another one.
You used to tell me when we lived in Europe, you know, Annie, they have cats in France. They have dogs in France.
You don't have to bring ours.
Every time I wanted to get a dog, you'd be like, no, we're not doing that. You get mad.
Okay, so Annie, tell us how to keep these little adorable creatures alive.
All right. Well, we're not going to use your definition of that. But, well, so everything, just like with humans, starts with food. And that's the basis of health for all critters. And lots of critters come, especially ones that might end up in a shelter situation, probably haven't come from the best environment. They probably have all been fed dry food at the lowest rung of the dry food ladder that's full of grains and corn and all the ways that we're eating that make us sick. Well, that's in the dog food and the cat food now. So just to tell a little story, so we had a dog that found us when we first came back from Europe. She was a Great Pyrenees, and she was very thin, and she looked like she was going to die, and her jaw had been broken, so she couldn't eat very easily, and her hip had been broken. And so she didn't want to leave. She loved the kids, and she just would stay, and then she'd go away for, an hour or two and then come back. So I started feeding her, and I started feeding her fish. And by eating the fish, she could chew it enough and swallow it, and then she would get sick. So that told me her gut was sick. So I started to work on her gut. I made up, so I was giving her raw fish. And I was giving her raw tuna because I could buy a lot of it, like pretty cheaply. And I also fed her something that I made up called VitaSup, which had a lot of things that she needed for anything to be healthy, but it had crude protein and fat and fiber, calcium, phosphorus, dried yeast powder from something like Brewers or nutritional yeast, kelp powder, lecithin, wheat bran, bone meal, vitamin C, and garlic powder. And all those things put together, she liked the taste of that. Almost any dog or cat would like it. And so she started eating the fish for me, and then she started to gain some weight, and then she started to lose her hair.
Yeah, well, and this is a dog that was really close to death.
Yeah, she had this huge head. I couldn't understand how she could have such a huge head and then almost no body, but she was literally starved to death. So she started to gain weight, and she was like a lot more attentive and everything, and then she started losing her hair. So I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing? So I looked it up, and there was a lot of mercury in the fish. And so I was hurting her while at the same time I was trying to help her. So anyway, I decided to switch to raw turkey. You could buy ground raw turkey, and that's what I started to feed her. And then eventually I moved on to having my own chicken, which I ground up in my KitchenAid, and we'd grind up the bones and everything into the food. And it was like I looked up one day, and here was this beautiful dog. She had gained weight. Her hair looked great. She was so happy to be with us. And I realized then that really it is always going to be about the food if we want to be healthy, whatever that is. So what I would do when I made food for her, and again, there are books out there. You can go online and look up all this stuff. It's all very doable. So what I'm suggesting is if you have an animal that has health issues, the first thing you should look at is what are you feeding it? And then I think you want to move away from what you're feeding it and start doing some things with some raw food so the body and the immune system can recover. And then you can do some research on an easier way to feed your animal. You can buy plans. You can get food in the mail. You can buy frozen food at most any grocery store now that has its own little frozen food section just for raw food that's made up for dogs and cats.
Really? Frozen food for dogs?
Yeah, but
We're-
Okay,
we're
don't give me
taking
that
out
look. Don't
we're
give me.
taking out a second mortgage here.
Yeah, no. So what I did.
TV dinners for your dog.
TV dinners for dogs. All right. So people, a lot of people that have pets sincerely do care for their animal, and they don't want it to be sick. So if you get an animal that's been eating some of the kinds of food that are available commercially, they're going to get diabetes, kidney failure, asthma, all the things that humans get. And you're going to say, oh my gosh, I don't want my animal to die. That's so painful.
Well,
and
I
sad."
remember when you were dealing with some of these animals, you would always say, well, what would they be eating naturally
Yes, that's
in the
correct.
wild? And you say, all right, it's going to be primarily raw meat.
Well, protein.
Yeah, some sort of, and maybe some plants, the
Well,
grain that
what
might
would
be in the
gut
stomach.
of the?
Right.
So if you're a cat and you ate a mouse, there would be a certain amount of grains, probably grains in
but just
the
a
stomach.
wee little bit.
Yeah, not very much. So and cats actually need 99% protein to stay really super healthy.
So then what are the commercial cat and dog foods made of? Like rice and corn and, I mean, I look at
Well,
the
rice is
ingredients,
okay, but here's the
but that's
challenge.
not what they'd eat in nature.
No, but you can't always make that happen. But here's the thing of what they are eating is horrible stuff that has lots of antibiotic in it coming from animals that meat that people are eating. So the waste products of those butchered animals are being ground up and put into these feeds. So we're injecting all kinds of antibiotic and other kinds of problems that animal probably had by being in a feedlot somewhere. So we have to move away from that. Anyway, so here's what I made. My raw food recipe for the kittens that I used to foster came out of a book called Natural Nutrition, and so what I would do is I would grind up meat and bones and organic egg, which I produce myself, and raw oats, brewer's yeast, and then I would put in my VitaSup recipe, and then they would eat it. And if they were being fussy, so they were kittens that were really sent because they were going to die from the shelter, and it was a no-kill shelter. So what I would do is to take a little tiny dollop of the food I made and put it in the middle of the dish, and then I would take the food they'd been given and were used to and make a ring around it like it's a donut. And so every day they would have to eat more and more of the food. They'd accidentally get a taste of it by licking and chewing and biting the food that they were used to. So, and that's how I would get them to eat the foods I wanted them to.
So you wean them off the stuff they were eating that was bad for them.
Right, and help them to develop a taste for the stuff I wanted them to eat.
So that if you serve a meal and it's in a donut shape with something that I like on the outside, right, or on the
I never
inside.
thought of that, but I really should try that
I've
with
been
you.
redirected here with
Yeah.
some kibbles, sprinkled in the
just think
middle.
of that. So here's some foods that really animals should avoid, but especially if the animal has a health challenge. So first of all is a lot of that processed dog and cat foods, which contain all kinds of things that produce sugar in the dogs and cats, and that's how they end up with things like diabetes and cancer. So there are some foods that are good, and some dry foods that are good. We call them extruded foods or processed foods. I have recently seen some articles saying that these new foods that don't have the grains in them are killing the animals. Well, I'd want to see who sponsored that survey.
Well, some of them are super expensive, too.
Well, they're expensive because they don't have horrible waste from sick animals in the food.
And they seem like they're pretty much like wild animal based, like the salmon and caribou and all
we'll
of those
see.
kind of
I'm
things.
not sure. I don't want to speak
Who knows?
to
Maybe
that.
it's Joe Salmon and Fred Caribou.
That's right. Our animals seem to do fine on those foods, and then they do get raw foods. They get raw vegetables. Whatever's coming out of the kitchen, they get raw fruits, and they get raw eggs. Pretty much every day. So sugar is never good for pets, and it isn't good for humans. And some of the words that you'll see in some of these packages will show you things like, it'll say beets or brown sugar or corn sweeteners or glucose, or there's so many names for sugar that are hidden in those products. But the goal is to try to stay away from that. So dogs and cats should not have chocolate. Dogs are extremely allergic. Their chocolate is poisonous to. I almost killed a dog once. He bought me a box of Lady Godiva chocolates for Christmas, and Ginger's sitting there begging, so I let her have one. And the next thing, we're at the vet's because she's going to die.
Well, and that dog, Sophie, broke into the bag of Oreos, and fortunately, there's almost no chocolate.
No, it's that I was like, oh my God, she ate every Oreo cookie. And I said, give me the package, I have to see. And the very last ingredient was chocolate. So she only pooped
just
black.
Trace amounts.
That's right. She only pooped black fake chocolate for 2 days.
That's more info than
But she was fine. Anyway, dairy products are really hard on both cats and dogs, but especially cats.
Well, that's weird. You think of feeding them a little bowl of milk.
No. And it causes diarrhea. And you could kill a kitten.
Really?
Yes, you could kill a kitten. The people across the road did that, and I ended up with the kitten for 3 weeks trying to bring it back from what they had fed it.
You've just ruined half my childhood fantasies here.
Okay.
A little bowl of milk for the little kitty.
All right, but usually those kittens are in a barn where there are milk cows, and that milk is not processed in any way, so it may be that it's a little kinder to them.
Plus they get 1 or 2 squirts is all.
Well, or in a dish. Plus, nobody follows them around to see what their poo looks like, so we don't know.
Or let's hope nobody does.
Well, I mean, they get sick. So also certain kinds of grains, because they need fat and they need protein, and grains produce sugar. So where's the balance in that feed that you're going to feed them? Also, commercial yeast. This is a fungus, and dogs have a hard time tolerating that. The kinds of yeast, if you will, yeast that they need are things like brewer's yeast and nutritional yeast, which are really minerals that are super good for humans, all mammals. They should not consume alcohol. Now, my mom did have a dog that my mom loved to have a drink in the evening. I forget what she drank.
It was like one continuous drink.
No. And I think she'd call it a highball, whatever that is. But anyway.
Mostly vodka. So she was feeding vodka to her
No,
dog?
not on purpose, but sometimes she would have the drink
Here,
sitting by it. No,
buddy.
I saw it happen. So this little schnauzer, she would wait patiently for my mom to be distracted, and maybe the phone would ring or something.
Schnockered schnauzer.
Yeah. In those days, you had to go to the wall to talk on the phone because it had a cord. And she'd look over, and the dog would have drunk like all of the drink and be staggering and just fall over and be asleep for the rest of the night.
So besides being funny, it's not good for the animal, right?
It's not funny. Yeah, it's funny. I'm sorry. But it's ethyl alcohol, which is irritating to all of the soft membranes in every mammal.
Sure.
And a dog's a little soul, so mostly little souls, and cats. I've never known a cat to drink alcohol, but I suppose it's possible. So the other thing that we can talk about is what other kinds of foods you could add to raw food. So I just mentioned that we could add vegetables. So you could cut up or put through a food processor different kinds of vegetables, green beans, also fruits. Dogs like apples.
Well, I know Sophie likes to go out and eat the tomatoes in our
She
garden.
does, and they also have discovered persimmons. But then they also eat lots of poops from different things, so I don't really
You keep bringing it back to poop. I don't know about this.
No. But the other thing that you can add that's really helpful once a week or so is add a little bit of grated garlic, even though they say, dogs and cats shouldn't have garlic. It's a natural antibiotic, and it can be really helpful in fighting parasites. And also some cod liver oil a few times a week.
Okay, well, let me interrupt you to remind everyone that you're listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you that it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
And thank God.
Thank God, Annie. So you're talking about how to keep these drunk little dogs and cats alive and healthy. And we'll try and keep you out of the litter box here for a little while. And so tell us some more ways to keep these animals.
I don't know. You're not appreciating my skills here. So what do you do with a sick animal? What do you feed a sick animal? And one of the first things I do if I have a dog or a cat that's eating a lot of grass, they're doing that because it calms their stomach. I don't recommend humans try this. They can't digest grass. But the main thing is they're showing me something's not balanced in that system. And so it may be that they're not sick. Maybe there's something else going on. Maybe they're stressed out. But so the first thing I would do if I see them eating grass or getting sick, throwing up, is I'm going to get some powdered acidophilus, which is the bacteria that's in yogurt, plain yogurt, not the stuff that has fruit in it and stuff. And then I'm going to offer that to them. And that's more than likely going to calm whatever's going on because it reintroduces the good bacteria because the bad bacteria is not balancing out.
And when you talk about giving them acidophilus, how much are we talking about? A tablespoon, a cup,
No,
a
it
teaspoon?
just would be like an eighth of a teaspoon. There's
and then
billions
you put it
of
on
bacteria.
their food?
Or in their mouth, directly in their
just-
mouth. Either way, it's probably better just to put it in their mouth so it's not competing with the gastric juices that come from the food.
Mm-hmm.
Also, if they're ill, I would make special food for them. So I might decide I'm going to make up a diet of protein, vegetables, and grains. And the grains would be like wheat germ and raw oats or oat bran and maybe even cooked brown rice.
But didn't you just say the grains aren't good for them?
These grains are fine. It's corn and the byproducts of corn that's killing all mammals, not just dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're not well, that stuff needs to be taken away and you're going to see a change. So if you have a dog or a cat that has a very oily coat, you should take that food away because it's really making them sick. You want to have a nice soft coat, a thick coat of hair. So that's the first thing that I notice when people introduce me to their pets is what does that coat feel like and look like? Because it's going to tell me a lot about what they're eating.
I know you had someone who had come to our farm. She had spent thousands of dollars at OSU's veterinary with her dog. Had some sort of skin rash, and it really just was what she was eating.
It was mange. It was mange.
Oh.
We changed everything, but we took away what they were doing because the dog was in total agony. And then we made a mixture of acidophilus and into a cream with coconut oil. And then the dog was massaged with that a couple of times a day. And that took away all of the problem and plus changed the food diet so that the dog had a lot better immune system because when an animal is in a lot of pain, their immune system shuts down. And I think that's what had happened. I'd forgotten about that dog, but that dog was one open sore. It was so horrible. She was just miserable. So we've done that a lot with things like mange to try to deal with just reestablishing a balance of bacteria on the animal and in the gut. So that's pretty important. Also, animals often have a very tough time because they have an imbalance of minerals. So we like to feed kelp occasionally. You can also offer some natural fats like coconut oil or even grass-fed beef tallow or lard that, again, if they're sick, you're not necessarily going to do that if there's nothing wrong.
So what you're saying is like what Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine.
That's correct. It is our medicine. I also like vitamin E and vitamin A. Vitamin E comes in a capsule, a capsule, and you can just poke it with a toothpick and squirt that right into their mouth or onto their food, and they like that. And of course, as I said, I also use acidophilus quite a lot for many different things. When we talk about how do we get the animals to eat some of these things, especially cats who tend to be finicky, there's a few bribe foods. So you could take some baby food, like squash or spinach or even green beans, and put a little bit of that on the top of the food. They also like tomato sauce sometimes, soy sauce, tamari sauce, or sardines in a can. So you can take just a tiny bit of that and put that on that raw food that you want them to eat, or you could put that around the edge of it so that when they're eating the food you're trying to transition them from, they transition to eating the food new taste they really like to the food taste that they aren't keen about. One of the things that's really a big problem for lots of cats, particularly kittens, is upper respiratory infection, URI. And so you'll see in shelters, and a lot of cats are born with URI because they inherit it from their mother. And they'll usually have runny eyes. They may cough a lot. And so one of the ways...
Is this something like they call kennel cough?
No, kennel cough is dogs, and that's different, but that has to do with the bacteria mold in the air.
So it's not only they come into the kennel or into the shelter sick, but they can catch things while they're
that's
there.
really bad. It can be fatal, I believe. So they have vaccination for that. Anyway, so URI it's not usually fatal, but it lasts the life of the animal. So you're going to want to consider that if you're adopting an animal, if it has runny eyes. But anyway, so the way that you give lots of cats medication, especially antibiotic, is through their eye. So you use drops. And this is how URIs can be treated. Now, that's not the way I treat it. I like to use L-lysine, L-lysine. And it has a really good impact on it. It doesn't make it go away, but what it does is it helps the cat to arrest the symptoms. So particularly in the winter when it's cold outside and there's dry heat in the house and all that, that's when you usually see the symptoms once you get them under control. So they do suffer unless you figure out how to take care of it. But the antibiotic at some point will stop working because the animal will develop an immunity to it. But the L-lysine, what I would do is it's a really big, I call a horse pill, and I grind it up with a little pedestal thing that I have, and then I can just put that on the top of the food, and they'll eat it for me. And it really does arrest the symptoms fairly quickly.
But this treatment, like it sounds like with most of your treatments with the animals, is if you can make the animal healthy through diet and safe
talking
place
to their
live,
immune system.
Yeah, then their body will essentially take care of itself.
It tries.
For the most part.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, this is the kicker here. So if you do these things with these remedies, and particularly if you have a remedy from a vet and it's not working, then stop trying to pretend it's going to, because the animal is suffering. So move on to maybe a more natural solution, or move on to something else, because you can't just keep doing the same thing and expecting that it's going to work if it's not working. But if you've done everything you can and it's still not okay, then that's when you have to say that immune system is not going to step up to the plate to help heal this animal or help it to be healthy enough to have a good life. And you must have mercy and decide how you're going to end the life of that animal.
Well, so many people, though, who are so attached to their critters, they seem to just almost torture the poor beast, wanting to keep it alive. It's this little shell of an animal.
Yeah, well, I don't blame people. I really don't, because I don't want anything to happen to my cats and dogs. And as they get older, I think about that and I worry about it. But I also have a plan of how I'm going to deal with it, and I know when it's time. So,
I hope this plan doesn't involve puppies and kittens.
Well, that's the next step, but we aren't going to talk about that. So I don't want to even think about that. But
it reminds me when Catelyn was just a little kid and her dog had got hit by a car on the road.
That was so terrible.
It was so traumatic. And then
not for her. I was the one who was terrible.
But we were standing at the grave after having buried this animal, and we're all kind of looking at Catelyn saying, is she going to get over this? And she looked up and was like, can we get a puppy?
I said, take her away, please. Anyway, so let's talk about some other options for healing. So golden seal, which is a natural, it's a medicinal plant, kills germs and helps to shrink tissue. So you can get this in an elixir form. You can get it in a tincture form, and it's really great with kittens and cats to help them, especially if they are super, super sick. You can put it in the drinking water. Colloidal silver, you can actually see online how to make this for yourself, but it is a very gentle antibiotic, and it works well to put in the mouth of kittens to help them. I've also used it for pink eye. Very good for pink eye. It'll take pink eye right out in a human or a goat or whatever. So garlic, I already mentioned, is a great weapon. It is nature's strongest antibiotic. Very, very helpful. I already mentioned acidophilus. Good bacteria fighting bad bacteria is the best thing for the immune system so that you can reestablish balance.
And acidophilus is a probiotic, right?
It is probiotic, and that's what we do instead of antibiotic. We also use diatomaceous earths to treat for fleas and different parasite issues. So it works really great, and you can dust your house with it. You can dust the animal with it. You just don't want to breathe it, or you don't want them to breathe it. And I also use something called arnica. It's a medicinal plant. It's you can get it in a homeopathic form, which is distilled down, or you can use it in a cream, or you can use it as a tea. It's very great for trauma. So if an animal has had trauma, whether it's an injury or a shock, very good for any mammal. Super, super good. So let's just talk a bit about feral and fearful behavior before we come to the end. And that has to do with the fact that animals, when they transition, so let's say they've been in a shelter and they're very depressed, or they've been coming from a different location to be with you, there's going to be some trauma.
Or a stray.
Yeah, a stray for sure. So we had a cat that got dumped at our farm, and she was really crazy feral. And so we brought her in, and we put her in a safe, snuggy location, so she was safe. And then every day I fed her a mixture of Bach remedies, Dr. Bach remedies, walnut oil, larch oil, and rescue remedy. And because I was feeding her, she did take the remedy. It was on the remedy. And it took about 2 weeks before, when I came near her, she didn't reach out to try to claw me to death and hiss at me and try to bite me. And I would say within a month, she came to the milk room and while I was milking and licked my hand. And I hadn't really touched her during that time. But those remedies reestablish balance in the nervous system. And they're really helpful for an animal that has to have surgery or travel, or if they're going to give birth. If there's going to be a substantial change in their life, they don't make them drunk. They just ask that nervous system to create balance for the human, for the mammal. It could be you. You're going to take a test. You're going to go sign a deal to borrow $1 million.
So I'll be less feral.
Okay, we'll go with that. All right,
Okay.
Whatever.
All right. Well, you've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. We want to thank our award-winning producer, Adam Rich, who loves every cat and dog that crosses his path. We also want to thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is?
Let's see. Well, play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and adopt animals from the shelter. There's too many in the world as it is.
All right. Until next time. Bye-bye.
And her children will be healed. See the morning glory blossom in the night. Know the stars are dancing in the twilight. Soon we'll be together. All will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and the children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at BlueRockStation.com.
Yeah.